Hi, welcome to Books and Bocadillos. My name is Mariandrea and it's March 1st. Happy March. And today is the start of the week of weird. It is Sunday, and for the next week, I will be joining other people here on BookTube subscribers as well in celebration of all things weird lit. The Week of Weird is hosted by Crystal at the channel Fiber Artsy and Jason at Jason's Weird Reads. I had tried to make a video about weird poetry because one of the prompts for the Week of Weird is to read weird poetry. I tried, and first time didn't go so great, so I'm trying again. Hopefully this time I will get to post a video. Um, I've gone through my shelves and pulled out books that either have weird elements to them or have a weird vibe. I wouldn't say that any of these books are classified as weird lit, um, but I find them very appealing and weird. So I want to share them with you. I am no expert on weird poetry, so I have looked into collections that I don't own. And I have some saved in my cart. So maybe at the end, I'll go through some of the books that I've come to hear about as weird poetry or, um, have that weird vibe. But yet I haven't obtained copies of these books. So that'll be at the end. From my shelves, what I currently own is this collection. And I'm going to start with one that I was sure I had on my shelves, but I couldn't find my copy. And it's one of my favorite epic poems, one of my favorite just stories of all time, and that is um, the Divine Comedy, but specifically Dante's Inferno. Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, and I especially love Dante's Inferno. And for me, I think that that's a very weird piece of classic literature. I first read Dante's Inferno when I was in high school, and I've reread it since, but it's been years. I was absolutely floored and fascinated by Dante's Inferno, and I think it's a weird thing to read. So if you're into like a longer epic poem, I think Dante's Inferno might be a lot of fun. It's definitely weird. And then another book that I recently read that it's just, I first came to it in high school and I read this recent translation of another epic poem, and it is Beowulf. This translation is by Maria Dahvana Headley. I think Beowulf is weird. And I was glad that my first interaction with Beowulf was when I was in high school and we could talk about it, because it's one of those books that if you are reading it for the first time, you might finish and be like, what did I just read? I like this collection because it's really accessible. I think Maria Dahvana Headley does a really great job at translation and making it very modern and accessible. So I could reread this again and again because there's just so much in it. It's such a deep piece of work that I feel like I could read it 10 times and still come away with, I want to read this again because I don't, like, there's just so much. It's so profound. There's so much to explore. It like makes my head explode every time it feels that way. So I would consider this weird. And then I have, speaking of like worlds and fantasies, again, I don't think any of these books are considered weird fiction, but for me, Nikita Gill's Fierce Fairytales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul, they are fantastic, but they're fairy tales and they are weird. I mean, I think that they're weird in the sense that they have like these fantasy elements, like the Little Mermaid's mother speaks to her unborn baby. I can read this one. Listen to me, you are a half ocean girl with wild that you have still to unlock from your soul. No man can help you discover who you are. This is a thing you must do on your own. Chase your adventures, face your breaking. It's the pain that will teach you how to make yourself whole. The water and the wild have never forgotten you, and in them you will always have a home. Become the thing your blood demands, the siren queen, ready to take her throne. And then there's a sea witch's lament next to it. It says, to really see what the sea witch had to go through, you must first remember what happens when you get your heart broken for the very first time. People always minimize it, say you'll get over it, say first loves don't matter as much as last ones. But that first heartbreak, that's the death of your innocence, and you're blindly walking in the darkness that's trying to absorb you. A darkness that you have no tools or weapons to navigate. That is what the end of first love feels like. Some of us come out of that darkness still mostly whole, and those are the lucky ones. Because some of us never come back at all. And this was the story of the sea witch, the incredible ample-bodied being who was larger than life as a child, living her life with laughter and magic and joy. She spent her days learning how to look after the forgotten sea creatures that the mer people considered too ugly or terrifying to tend to. Pilot fish and barracudas and eels were her friends, for they knew it was her they could always look to. Unfortunately, for the sea witch, love comes for every woman. Just when we are sure we are safe from its clutches, it moves its way inside our hearts, and we give ourselves completely to it, surrender in every way possible. This is why it is said, love is to women what war is to men. 16-year-old sea witch fell in love with the then 17-year-old mer prince, and he fell too for this impossible, wonderful, darkly magical girl from a different tribe who he knew his family would never approve of. You would hope it would be that simple, that when two people give each other their hearts, the world falls away and lets them be, but that is rarely the case. Love is as complicated as the truth. So when his father presented him with an ultimatum, with a choice to give up his future kingdom, and Ursula, Triton, chose his kingdom, a part of him was too cowardly and too haughty to live the way she did, simply and protecting everything the mer people threw away. So the sea witch was left to wander this darkness alone, and she never came out of it. To save herself from destruction, she blindly grabbed at her only lifeline, that which armored what was left of her ruined heart, by choosing the destruction that her mother, the sea, had given her in her blood. The sea witch was never born evil. She became that way because she couldn't let loose her emotions. Instead, she buried them deep and let them fester and turn into poison. This is the damage not grieving properly for first love can do. It can consume and destroy and harden all the goodness inside of you. In the sea witch's story, she had no one to turn to, but you, my darling, have an army of all of the stars to fill your grief-filled days with the comfort you can hold on to. You are not alone with this endless universe above you that has given you the gift of existence. You are not alone. Now that is a beautiful story of like Ursula from The Little Mermaid, the sea witch. But this is the kind of poetry. These are the kinds of stories that are in here. They are stories that are magical and of magical creatures and just things that are all about fantasy. And for me, anything that is not of reality can be interpreted as weird. So this is a beautiful collection of fairy tales. So Aimee Nezhukumatathil is one of my favorite modern day poets, and this is At the Drive-In Volcano. I absolutely love this cover, and I've read from this collection before, so like I have a bookmark in here from previous times when I've talked about it, but I'll just read this one to you. This is The Woman Who Eats Soil. What can the unfortunate insect do if it is found wanting in weight? A pale bug rolls into a bead of silent news. The damsel fly can bend a petal, back without leaving her mark. Trickster, there is a woman named Fengles who cups soil to her lips for over 70 years. In the hem of her blouse, in the roll of her pant leg, she brings back a crumble of earth. Knives stripe a feathered neck in the kitchen for a thin broth, so no one hear her first chew, chow, chaw. Two schoolboys tie a kite to their wrists as they walk to school. How eats in the window and waits. Tonight, father leaves for business, and no one, not even the cabbage, will give her an eye. The crickets, caged in dainty silk lanterns, stop their song and listen for the chew. They have an idea on how to grow bigger, too big for this purse, but it is forgotten with each bite. And that's just an example of a poem that is a bit weird, right? Like a woman who eats dirt, and almost feels like that Hansel and Gretel kind of story. Naomi Shihab blurbed this in the back, on the back cover, and it says, Aimee Nezhukumatathil's poems are ripe, funny, and fresh. They are the fullness of days, deliciously woven of heart and verve, rich with sources and elements, animals, insects, sugar, cardamom, legends, countries, relatives, soaps, fruits, taste and touch. I love the nubby layerings of lines, luscious textures and constructions. She knows that many worlds may live in one house. Now that's another kind of very weird and cool image, right? Many worlds in a house. Like, that's really, really cool. And a little bit about the poet. Aimee Nezhukumatathil is also the author of Miracle Fruit, winner of the Forward Magazine Book of the Year Award in Poetry and the Global Filipino Award, and Lucky Fish, grand prize winner of the Eric Hoffer Award and co-winner of the Gold Medal from the Independent Publisher Book Awards. She has been a faculty member at the Kundiman Retreat for Asian American Writers and given readings and workshops from Amsterdam to San Francisco. She is an associate professor of English at the State University of New York in Fredonia, where she received the SUNY Chancellor's Medal for scholarly and creative activities. And I really think she's a great writer and poet. Speaking of Naomi Shihab Nye, I have one of her collections here. This one is actually shelved YA. I think it's deliciously weird. It is Castaway, Poems for Our Time by Naomi Shihab Nye. I don't think that this is only for children or young adults. I think that adults can enjoy the poetry in here as well. And the first poem that I open up to is this one. So this is about all things castaway, all things trash, rubbish, garbage, unwanted things. And this is Tony's trash. When my friend Tony was very sick, he worried about his small apartment high over the river. Who would empty it when he died? He gave me a key, told me to pass on his 2 carpets he called magic flying carpets to my mom. We were the last people to see him except for a nurse. He fluttered his fingers at us. He really believed in heaven. I arrived after his death to find his apartment stripped bare, door standing wide open, all his clothes and big shoes gone. His little table and chairs and plants, even his walker. His neighbors had been hard at work. I had to track down those carpets, but in the trash can 5 giant crystal teardrops on a long thread that had hung in his window, the prettiest thing he owned, thrown away. I could imagine him watching rainbow light shimmer through refracting teardrops. As he wrote his 1,000,000 emails to the city council, the mayor, the police chief about all the injustice in the city he wanted to heal, it pained him personally to see a dirty, drunken man sleeping by flower pots in the corner, or anxious human beings lined up clutching paperwork outside the Mexican consulate on the other corner. Why didn't we take better care of one another? Noise too loud outside the cathedral, trash bins overflowing. Tony, Tony, none of us are perfect. He believed in angels, though. He was the old world town crier, riveted by wrong, unseen rainbow tears flowing down his walls. This one I'll read because I think this is about a bagel, but not really. Not a bagel, but a cup lid rolled away in a strong wind like a happy wheel gone free, careened down the street without falling over like in David Ingtau's wondrous poem, The Bagel, from my high school textbook. David dropped his bagel and it rolled. While chasing after it, he entered the moment so thoroughly he became a bagel too. At least in metaphor. Feeling strangely happy with himself, this helped me in high school. Despite high school, we might still be happy. I did not become a plastic couplet, but felt so happy for an image from a poem which can stay with you for your whole life. And then I have this collection, Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith, because what is weird, right? Some of these poems feel like, again, another world, science fiction, space travel, life on Mars, like that's weird, right? This one poem here is an example of what you might find in this collection. The universe as primal scream. 5 p.m. on the nose, they open their mouths and it rolls out, high, shrill, and metallic. First the boy, then his sister. Occasionally they both let loose at once, and I think of putting on my shoes to go up and see whether it is merely an experiment their parents have been conducting upon the good crystal, which must surely lie shattered to dust on the floor. Maybe the mother is still proud of the 4 pink lungs she nursed to such might. Perhaps if they hit the magic decibel, the whole building will lift off and will ride to glory like Elijah. If this is it, if this is what their cries are cocked toward, let the sky pass from blue to red to molten gold to black. Let that heaven we inherit approach, whether it is our dead in Old Testament robes or a door opening onto the roiling infinity of space. Whether it will bend down to greet us like a father or swallow us like a furnace, I'm ready to meet what refuses to let us keep anything for long. What teases us with blessings, bends us with grief, wizard, thief, the great wind rushing to knock our mirrors to the floor to sweep our short lives clean. How mean our racket seems beside it, my stereo on shuffle, the neighbor chopping onions through a wall. All of it just a hiccup against what may never come for us. And the kids upstairs still at it, screaming like the dawn of man as if something they have no name for has begun to insist upon being born. I've read this one before, Life on Mars, I think, and that's a really good one. I also like this one, The Universe, original motion picture soundtrack. The first track still almost swings, hi-hat and snare, even a few bars of sax the stratosphere will singe out soon enough. Synthesized strings, then something like cellophane breaking as if snagged to a shoe, crinkle and drag, white noise, black noise, what must be voices bob up, then drop like metal shavings in molasses. So much for us, so much for the flags we bored into planets dry as chalk for the tin cans we filled with fire and rode like cowboys into all we tried to tame. Listen. The dark we've only ever imagined now audible thrumming, marbled with static like grisly meat, a chorus of engines churns, silence taunts a dare, everything that disappears as if returning somewhere. And this poem reminds me of The Science of Sleep, the movie with Gael Garcia Bernal, and it's the mention of cellophane where they create this like dream-like world where they move and everything is like of paper quality and like there's paper animation and flowing waters of cellophane. Just that image just triggered my brain to go into like that memory of the movie, The Science of Sleep. So speaking of The Science of Sleep and Gael Garcia Bernal, and speaking of one of my favorite Mexican actors, Gael Garcia Bernal, I wanted to show this collection by Pedro Iniguez, Mexicans on the Moon, Speculative Poetry from a Possible Future, with an introduction by Gavino Iglesias. So Gavino Iglesias writes horror, and I think this collection of speculative poetry is a mix of genres, like a mashup of genres. I'll read the back. Weaving science fiction, Mexican folklore, and magical realism, this 50-poem collection explores the wonders and pitfalls of humanity in a future yet to come. Experience a faraway world where sapient flora sing melodic tunes, behold orbit-plunging taco trucks as they make planet fall, observe as El Cucuy becomes a stowaway on a space shuttle, witness a neurologically enhanced lobster become president of the United States. Bear the agonizing weight of shrink, ray, gun violence plaguing public schools. All these sights and more await in Mexicans on the Moon. Speculative poetry from a possible future. Let me see. What do I want to read from here? How about this one? Sand castles on the moon. The old man crouched beside the crying boy, tears pooling on the sand in which he played. He known Carlito's father had passed out for one last stripe and forever gone away. The old man asked, "What are you doing?" As Carlito molded wet mounds of dirt, building sand castles on the moon, the boy said, his voice full of hurt. What creativity, the old man said, pondering marvels as he'd built earlier in life, like the first lunar colony or even an interstellar drive. Well, isn't that strange, the old man said, retrieving a bucket and a spade. He handed Carlito his new presents, knowing what it would mean one day. The exchange had been made, the boy's eyes twinkling as he played with his gift, and with a swift leap, old man Carlito vanished into the temporal rift. Okay, this one's pretty interesting. Well, they're all really interesting, but this one just grabbed my attention to read. Resting glitch face. My 3D printed girlfriend tried to kill me today. She grabbed my wrist with one hand, choked me with the other, and asked how I liked it. Hydraulic fluid seeped from her eyes as she pointed to the sliced synthetic skin on her face. She told me it was my turn. I told her I was going to call the police. She just belched out a guttural laugh and said that she'd deny everything, that I was overreacting and hadn't taken any medication, which I knew she flushed down the toilet. Besides, no one would believe a pea-brained imbecile like me, she said. Where did the idiot learn to speak like that? I was told my 3D printer was capable of creating adaptive, fully functional automatons. I didn't expect technical malfunctions like physical abuse and gaslighting. I am demanding a full prompt refund. Please act swiftly. She's making copies of herself, and let me tell you, they don't look pleased. I think this is a really, really interesting collection of poetry, and I am hoping to read some more of it during this week. And I have a couple more books here. These are a little bit kind of different. They are classical collections of poetry. The first one that I have here is Cesar Vallejo, The Eternal Die Selected Poems. So I actually just found this one this weekend, and I love this cover. I had read Cesar Vallejo's poetry before, but I never owned a collection of his poetry. So Cesar Vallejo is a Peruvian poet. He was exiled from Peru, and he traveled through Europe, and he also visited Russia. These poems are translated by Margaret Jewel Costa, and the publishing summary says, the Peruvian poet Cesar Vallejo, one of Latin America's most famous writers, along with Pablo Neruda, began publishing his poems in 1914 after discovering the works of Walt Whitman, the French symbolist, and the modernist Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío. 5 years later, he published his first book of poems, Los Heraldos Negros, and in 1922, he published his famous Trilce, which met a cool reception at first. Vallejo spent many years of his life in Europe, living in Paris and Spain, Like many of the surrealists, he became a Marxist, and he was an ardent supporter of the Republicans' cause during the Civil War. In his poems, Vallejo poignantly describes human misery, isolation, and anguish. As his translator, Margaret Joel Costa, explains, Vallejo edited and redrafted and honed his poetry. This is the only way in which he could describe the antithetical, paradoxical, oxymoronic universe he was living in by using language at full tilt, making it perform all kinds of acrobatics. The resulting poems often defy interpretation, spanning his career up to his early death. This marvelous new bilingual selection confirms Robert Haas's assessment that Vallejo was one of the essential poets of the 20th century, a heartbreaking and groundbreaking writer. Thomas Merton blurbed this as Cesar Vallejo is the greatest universal poet since Dante. And a little bit from the introduction that I think kind of explains why I'm putting this in terms of like weird fiction. More than anything, it's very sad. It's very sad poetry. It has that like lament to it. And I think initially in his earlier career as a poet, a lot of his poetry is religious or has like religious themes to it, and then it becomes more and more political. And the translator has a note in here that I thought was really a good way of summarizing. I think his poetry like reflects surrealism, like Salvador Dali. So I want to read this translator note because I think it explains a little bit what I'm trying to say a little bit better than I can say it. The translator wrote, "We translators spend our lives trying to understand, to interpret, but here I realized I simply had to translate what was there, however obscure or nonsensical. Such strange pairings as bromidic slopes, nubile campaign, pancreatic fingers, or entirely new words, with Vallejo turning nouns into verbs, those aguas encontradas que jamás se han de isthmarse becomes two opposing waters that will remain forever unisthmused, or combining two adjectives into one, tembloroso and tenebroso, to make tenebroso, which in English becomes tremebrous, or mi padre es una víspera, literally, my father is an eve, which has become my slightly domesticated version, my father is the eve of something." The poems are also full of grammatically illogical phrases. El traje que vestí mañana, the suit I wore tomorrow, or me he sentado a caminar, I have just sat down to go walking. However, given Vallejo's worldview, according to which injustice reigns supreme, and God, if he exists, is cruel, indifferent, and incapable of doing anything about that scourge, death, another constant presence in Vallejo's worth, illogic seems the only logical response. So yeah, it's full of illogic and new like made up words and phrases, and there's a lot of pain. I'll read this one. Los 9 monstruos. Y desgraciadamente el dolor crece en el mundo a cada rato, crece a 30 minutos por segundo, paso a paso, y la naturaleza del dolor es el dolor 2 veces. Y la condición del martirio carnívora, voraz, es el dolor 2 veces. Y la función de la hierba purísima, el dolor 2 veces. Y el bien de ser dolernos doblemente. Jamás, hombres humanos, hubo tanto dolor en el pecho, en la solapa, en la cartera, en el vaso, en la carnicería, en la aritmética. Jamás tanto cariño doloroso, jamás tanta cerca arremetió lo lejos, jamás el fuego, nunca. Jugó mejor su rol de frío muerto. Jamás, señor ministro de salud, fue la salud más mortal. Y la migraña extrajo tanta frente de la frente, y el mueble tuvo en su cajón dolor, el corazón en su cajón dolor, la lagartija en su cajón dolor. Crece la desdicha, hermanos hombres, más pronto que la máquina a 10 máquinas, y crece con la res de Rousseau, con nuestras barbas. Crece el mal por razones que ignoramos, y es una inundación con propios líquidos, con propio barro y propia nube sólida. Invierte el sufrimiento, posiciones, da función en que el humor acuoso es vertical, el pavimento, el ojo es visto, y esta oreja oída, y esta oreja de 9 campanadas a la hora del rayo, y 9 carcajadas a la hora del trigo, y 9 sones hembras a la hora del llanto, y 9 cánticos a la hora del hambre, y 9 truenos, y 9 látigos, menos un grito. El dolor nos agarra, hermanos hombres, por detrás de perfil y nos aloca en los cinemas, nos clava en los gramófonos, nos desclava en los lechos, cae perpendicularmente a nuestros boletos, a nuestras cartas, y es muy grave sufrir. Puede uno orar, pues de resultas del dolor hay algunos que nacen, otros crecen, otros mueren y otros que nacen y no mueren, otros que sin haber nacido mueren y otros que no nacen ni mueren. Son los más, y también de resultas del sufrimiento estoy triste hasta la cabeza y más triste hasta el tobillo de ver el pan crucificado al nabo ensangrentado. This is the translation in English. The 9 monsters. And unfortunately, pain is growing in the world all the time. It grows at 30 minutes per second, step by step, and the nature of the pain is pain twice over, and the condition of martyrdom, carnivorous, voracious, is pain twice over. And the function of the purest grass, pain twice over, and the goodness of being pains us doubly. Never, fellow humans, has there been so much pain in the breast, in the lapel, in the wallet, in the glass, in the butcher's, in arithmetic. Never so much painful affection, never has the distant rushed in so close, never has fire ever been better in its role as deathly cold. Never, Mr. Minister of Health has health been more deadly, nor has migraine extracted so much forehead from the forehead, and in the sideboard drawer, pain, the heart in its drawer, pain, in the lizard in its drawer, pain. Unhappiness is growing, brother humans, more quickly than the machine, than 10 machines, and it's growing, along with Rousseau's cattle and our beards. Evil is growing for reasons we don't know, and it's a flood that brings its own liquids, its own mud, and its own solid cloud. Suffering inverts positions, making the aqueous humor vertical to the road. The eye is seen, and this ear heard, and this ear chimes 9 times at the hour of lightning, and 9 guffaws at the hour of wheat, and 9 female sounds at the hour of weeping, and 9 canticles at the hour of hunger, and 9 thunderbolts, and 9 lashes minus a scream. Pain grips us, brother humans, from behind, from the side, and drives us crazy in the movies, nails us in gramophones, nails us in beds, falls perpendicularly onto our tickets, onto our letters, and it's a serious thing to suffer. One can pray, but as a result of pain, there are some who are born, others grow, others die, and others are born and don't die, others who without being born die, and others are neither born nor die. They're the majority. And as a result of suffering, I am sad to the top of my head, and even sadder down to my ankles, to see the bread crucified, the turnip bloodied. So that is Cesar Vallejo and his poetry. And some descriptors for him are usually like avant-garde, surrealism, or surrealist. And I think very weird in just the way he uses language and creates new language and creates this surreal imagery. And then lastly from my collection, I have this beautiful book, Manos de Primavera. I love the artwork of this poetry picture book. I'm going to read. Oh, this one's really interesting. It's weird and it's interesting, and I want you to see a bit of the imagery here, just to kind of give you an idea. This is like a person in a casket held by vines in like the underworld, it looks like, and then there's these serpents in the underworld, it looks like, and darkness, and it's like a lullaby. You'll see. Memento. sorry, no momento, memento, aire de llano. La luna ya se, la luna ya se ha muerto, do, re, mi. La vamos a enterrar, do, re, fa. En una rosa blanca, do, re, mi. Con tallo de cristal, do, re, fa. Bajó hasta la chopera, do, re, mi. Se enredó en el zarzal, do, re, fa. Me alegro porque era, do, re, mi. Presumida de más, do, re, fa. No hubo para ella nunca, do, re, mi. Marido ni galán, do, re, fa. ¿Cómo se pondrá el cielo? Do, re, mi. Ay, ¿cómo se pondrá? Do, re, fa. Cuando llegue la noche, do, re, mi. Y no la vea en el mar, do, re, fa. Acudid al entierro, do, re, mi. Cantando el pío pa, do, re, fa. Se ha muerto la mambruna, do, re, mi. De la cara estelar, do, re, fa. Campanas de las torres, do, re, mi. Doblar que te doblar, do, re, fa. Culebras de las fuentes, do, re, mi. Cantar que te cantar, do, re, fa. And this other one here, it's also kind of a bit like surrealism. Oh, it's not a bit, it's very surreal. And this is the guitar, la guitarra. Empieza el llanto de la guitarra, se rompen las copas de la madrugada, empieza el llanto de la guitarra, es inútil. Es inútil callarla, es imposible callarla. Llora monótona como llora el agua, como llora el viento sobre la nevada. Es imposible callarla. Llora por cosas lejanas, arena del sur caliente, que pide camelias blancas. Llora flechas sin blanco, la tarde sin mañana y el primer pájaro muerto sobre la rama. Oh guitarra, corazón malherido por 5 espadas. It's about a weeping guitar. So Federico Garcia Lorca, I think, is a masterful poet. He's a classic Spanish poet, and I think he creates weird images that are very surreal and interesting. Really weird metaphors that are very memorable. And a couple of books that I just want to mention that I don't own, but I think I'd like to, are I'm just going through my online shopping carts, things I haven't ordered, but so there's a collection of nightmares by Christina Singh, and I'll try to put a picture up. It says, hold your screams and enter a world of seasonal creatures, dreams of bones and confessions, modeled from open eyes and endless insomnia. Christina Singh's a collection of nightmares is a poetic feast of sleeplessness and shadows, an exquisite exhibition of fear and things better left unsaid. Here are ramblings at the end of the world and a path that leads to 1,000 paper cuts at the hands of a skin carver. There are crawl-space whispers and fresh sheets gently washed with sacrifice and poison, and if you are careful in this ghost month, these poems will call upon the succubus to tend to your flesh wounds and scars. These nightmares are sweeping fantasies that electrocute the senses as much as they dull the ache of loneliness by showing you what's hiding under your bed, in the back of your closet, and inside your head. Singh's poems dissect and flower. Her autopsies are delicate blooms dressed with blood and syntax. Her words are charcoal and cotton, safe yet dressed in an executioner's garb. Dream carefully. You've already made your bed. The nightmares you have now will not be kind, and you have no one to blame but yourself. One of the books that I have on my wish list is Slug, the Sunday Times bestseller by Hollie McNish. This says, from Finnish saunas and soppy otters to grief, grandparents and Kellogg's anti-masturbation pants. Slug is a book which holds a mirror lovingly up to the world, past and present, through Hollie's driving, funny, hopeful poetry and prose. Slug is about the human condition of birth and death and how we manage the possibilities in between. So another poetry collection in my wish list is Chants by Pat Mora. I've talked about Pat Mora before as one of my favorite poets, and in this collection, the publisher summary is El Paso, the pass to the north, lies between vast stretches of desert. This geographic accident, yet like everywhere, people live, marry, grow old, and die. They also rejoice and despair. These poems relate to all these other experiences, but in the magical presence, the telluric forest of the desert. Two women poets sing here, one in the guides of the desert and the other in the figure of Pat Mora. Together they intone chants. The desert's beauty is perceived in subtle graduations of color and texture and stark contrast between light and darkness. It speaks as a magical force, as a lonely woman, and for her patience offers flowers. Like the desert, Pat Mora speaks with muted tones, weaves incarnations. She invests her poetic space with magical figures. Yet her loneliness comes as well fear, resentment, and despair. But she leans the peaceful solitude of the desert. From their dialogue become words become blossoms fragile in the desert rhythms. I think that might be something really weird but really beautiful. Lastly, I have this collection here, and I don't know. I think it might have some weird elements to it. It's Transversal Poems by Urayoan Noel, and it says Transversal takes a disruptive approach to poetic translation, opening up alternative ways of reading as poems get translated or transcreated into entirely new pieces. In this collection, Urayoan Noel masterfully examines his native Puerto Rico and the broader Caribbean as sites of transversal poetics and politics. Featuring Noel's bilingual playfulness, intellect, and irreverent political imagination, Transversal contains personal reflections on love, desire, and loss, filtered through a queer approach to form, expanding upon Noel's experiments with self-translation in his celebrated collection Buzzing Hemisphere, Rumor Hemisférico. This collection explores walking poems improvised on a smartphone, as well as remixed classical and experimental forms. Poems are presented in interlocking bilingual versions that complicate the relationship between translation and original, and between English and Spanish as languages of empire and popular struggle. The book creatively examines translation and its simultaneous urgency and impossibility in a time of global crisis. Transversal seeks to disrupt standard English and Spanish, and it celebrates the non-equivalence between languages. Inspired by Caribbean poet and philosopher Edouard Glissant, the collection celebrates Caribbean practices of creolization as maximalist, people-centered, affect-loaded response to the top-down violence of austerity politics. This groundbreaking modular approach to poetic translation opens up alternative ways of reading in any language. So this just sounds like experimental poetry, and I'm here for it. And I think sometimes experimental can feel weird, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that it's good. I think weird is a good adjective. I I love weird, and I love different, and I love unique. And so I think that's what I was trying to share here, is just a collection of all things that are atypical and different. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are enjoying some weird reads this week, and I will be back again soon in another video. Hasta la próxima.